Hello everyone, my name is Cameron Searles and I'm an environment designer. And in this video, I'm going to be breaking down the texturing process of my senior project. So in this video, I'm going to be describing the process I went through when texturing an object. And I'm also going to be talking about the experiences I've had, because this has been quite the learning experience for me. And I say that because out of everything that goes into a project like this, I've had the least amount of experience in texturing. And the reason why is because I was never properly taught how to texture a 3D object. The school that I go to, or actually I'm just graduating from, is Eastern Michigan University. And we were taught how to model in 3D, unwrap, applying textures, learned how to set up lighting and cameras within our scene, but they never touched on creating textures. So I was on my own for this one. But thankfully, I did watch a couple of tutorials on how to create textures using Substance Painter and Substance Designer. So I did have some leeway going into this project. So when I first started texturing, I wanted to get the bowling lane texture down. And I did this using Substance Designer, where I messed around with some nodes trying to get a wood board texture with some graininess on it. So I didn't spend too much time on the design because I wanted to make it look as seamless as possible. So by the time I got that done, I imported that wood texture into Substance Painter, where I applied it onto the bowling lanes. And then I began adding in decals such as dots, arrows, and pin placement numbers where the pin deck is. And so I just kept rolling with Substance Painter from there and used it to texture all the other objects in my scene. And I actually got a lot more out of it than I thought, because even though I've had little experience with Substance Painter prior, I got a whole lot out of this experience. Like, I've learned how to use fill layers and black masks over painting, because let's say, for example, I paint a portion of my object, then I go, maybe I should change the color or the roughness or what other attribute of what I just painted. So instead of erasing it and painting it again with the new changes, I can just go back to my fill layer and change those attributes without affecting where I just painted. So that definitely saved me some time right there. And it also helped that Substance Painter had a wide variety of different grudges and procedural patterns for me to use. Because as much as I would like to create these patterns and textures on my own, I didn't have the time nor experience to do so with the amount of time I had for this project. So I just used what they gave to me, and I was able to use it to my maximum potential. So now I'm going to go and break down the process I go through when I texture an object. So when I first start texturing an object, I try to figure out what parts of my object are going to have a certain texture, a certain roughness, a certain bump map to it, just any attribute that goes along with a certain portion of my object. So then I begin to experiment with various different materials, messing around with their colors, their roughness, their bump maps, and other attributes. And then I start masking in where those textures will show up on my object. So when I'm satisfied with the textures, I start getting more into detail by adding in decals in certain spots and erasing away grudges to make it look more organic and less procedural. So after experimenting with the tools and attributes, I become pretty satisfied with what comes out. However, sometimes my job isn't done there, because some other objects need to have very specific decals that Substance Painter simply cannot do. Like, for example, some of the decals on the arcade machines, the foosball, the skee ball, air hockey, all those objects need to have specific decals that Substance Painter just simply cannot do effectively and accurately. So my workaround is to export those textures, then import them into Photoshop, where I can redistribute the textures from there with the proper decals. And I actually had a lot of fun doing this process because I got to get creative with the various different decals, labels, and designs for certain objects such as beer bottles, arcade machines, and the TVs. So for the beer bottles, I created 2 different labels per bottle. So let's see, I had 5 bottles total. Actually, scratch that. I had 5 bottles total, 2 decals for 4 of those bottles, then I had 3 for 1 bottle. So I think I had a total of 11 different decals for the beer bottles altogether. Then for the arcade machines, I had 5 different designs, which originally I was going to have 7, but I realized that there were too many arcade machines within my scene, so I decided to limit it down to 5, and it actually worked out pretty well. And as for the TVs, I was trying to figure out what kind of content would be displayed on each of these TVs without infringing any copyright. So I had to get pretty creative with how I would display certain types of content with the resources that I had personally and from online. So after I textured all my assets, I knew I didn't have time to create textures for different wood floors, carpets, countertops, walls, etc. So I knew I had to get my textures from an online source. And thankfully, from one of my classes, I learned about a really good online source that had royalty-free textures that you can just download straight from the website, and it's free to use. And the website is called CCO Textures, and it is run and textures are created by Leonard Demis, if I said his name correctly. He makes exceptional textures, and I highly recommend checking out his website. And actually, while we're on that note, I actually used one of his carpet textures as a roughness map for a carpet design I wanted to create myself, because I wanted to create a unique aesthetic design for a bowling carpet like you usually would see at a bowling alley. Now, unfortunately, I don't have footage of me creating the design because it got corrupted, but I am able to show you the final results in the Photoshop document, so here's what it looks like. So after I gathered all my textures, I then went on to the next phase of my project, which was applying all the textures into my scene. And this was a pretty lengthy process because I had to create a whole bunch of nodes for all my objects. Like here, I'll provide a screenshot of all the nodes of my scene, and you get to see how many I had to make for this. So that pretty much wraps up the texturing phase of my project. Even though this wasn't the final phase was rendering and compositing, this was technically the last phase involving the creation of my project. So that pretty much wraps everything up. So thank you so much for watching. Be sure to check out my other pipeline breakdowns, and I will see you later.